his vision. So I want to start with Chancellor Mone, or as I refer to him, my former neighbor until he moved into public housing. So Mark, thanks for joining us. And Chancellor Blank, who I admire greatly, from a family of alumni, now in our third generation of graduates, one just minted in 2020 and two that are with you this year. So Becky, thank you very much for joining us and for your leadership. So Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you to give us a little bit of a background. Then we'll bring Becky in, and then I have several questions for both of you as leaders of institutions with both unprecedented challenges and a remarkable potential to continue to positively shape our economy.
Great. Thanks, Tim. It's just an honor to be here with you, with our audience at MMAC, following Dr. Raymond. No wonder he's Executive of the Year. And my esteemed colleague, Chancellor Blank. It's always wonderful to share the stage with her, and happy to talk about the partnerships that we have together, but especially the importance of the UW system, notably Madison and Milwaukee, as Research One institutions, as powerhouses of the economy, as you talked about earlier. And I'm going to talk about both the talent side as well as some of the research partnership sides of that. But right now, there was a headline today just out of Inside Higher Ed. We're looking at a $183 billion hit on this sector, higher education. And we'll expand a little bit on that. So talk about some of the things that we're doing and some of the ways that we're seeking to overcome that, and really ultimately seeking, continued advocacy and support, because we've all got an awful lot at stake, not just in terms of Metro Milwaukee, but really as we power the state together, especially with Madison. So UWM today, if we can advance the slide, just a quick snapshot, and I'll just blast through these really quickly. We have about 25,000 students across 3 campuses covering, of course, Milwaukee County, Washington, and Waukesha counties. Most of our students come from Wisconsin. We do have about half of the rest that come from international and other states. We put out, and have for the last decade, over 5,000 students per year, and they stay here. That's a really critical point. They come from here and they stay here, and they contribute to our tax base, to employment, and in particular, at UW-Milwaukee, our students are incredibly diverse. And Tim, I think about the work that we're doing with MMAC as a Region of Choice member, the commitments that we've made, and we're going to help the organizations in this region, because with over 6,000 diverse students, of those 25,000, it's pretty remarkable. That's just in terms of students of color at the undergraduate level. We have more at the graduate level. We also have the largest number by far of military veterans. We have a top 25 LGBTQ plus campus. We have the most students that are first generation, non-traditional, you name the dimension. That's what we're all about. So our students stay here and today represent almost 200,000 alumni that are in this area. So there's tremendous diversity, and we're the only urban Research One with an access mission, and those are both critically important. Why? Next slide, please. You could talk about these headlines with respect to both how Madison and Milwaukee jointly address these types of issues. But first, just starting at the top, the talent pipeline. If you talk to any CEO, any business leader over the last decade, that has been the most vexing issue in business, is we don't have the right people with the right skills at the right time. We've got a number of wonderful students in the talent pipeline, but the alignment continues to be one of the key issues. And so we're working on that in a number of different ways. We're both Madison and Milwaukee. If you look at the number of graduates in the high demand, fast growing areas, you would be really pleased with seeing north of 80% of our majors that really align with healthcare, business, tech sector types of jobs. It's pretty compelling. But look at these other headlines. This is what we do. Research universities address both in terms of the practice, in terms of COVID types of things, real problems, as well as the deep basic research that underlies the types of discovery. We create the knowledge that is used from, if you will, lab side to bedside. Then if you think about the importance of education, what we're doing for the state, for individuals, I'll talk about that more in a moment. But at the bottom, you can see the types of issues that we often deal with in terms of the misinformation that's out there, again, based in fact. And then, of course, on the lower right-hand side, continuing to chronicle issues around social unrest and developing policy prescriptions. Next slide, please. In a nutshell, I'm not going to go through all of these, but just take a look at what a degree means. And this is why higher education is so critical. providing opportunities. Top left side, you see, for graduates and for their families, for individuals in this state, greater employment opportunities, higher earnings, more likely to own a home, and so forth. On the other side, for communities and societies, why we matter, what degrees mean from any of our great public institutions at an incredible price point. Look at the bottom, democracy, more robust, higher engagement, more vibrant, healthy communities. People make more, they have more income, they have longer lives, they're healthier. This is a good thing. Education strongly correlated with that. Next slide, please. I know Chancellor Blank is going to talk at length about some of the powerful partnerships that we both have, both of the things that we're doing together, as well as what we're doing individually. I'm really pleased that a lot of these partnerships include Madison. For a long time, for many decades, Madison has been a critical player in terms of the types of research that's done around fresh water, major national and international research powerhouse. Similarly, we have the only graduate school of freshwater science that has now been expanded to be undergraduate as well. So we have formed the basis for the Freshwater Collaborative to bring all the different UW institutions together to create more talent, to solve research. When we talk about PFAS, when we talk about the dead zones in Green Bay, the other contaminants, things that are part of being an agricultural state, as well as industrial history, we've got a lot of solutions around lead pipe issues and things like that. So Freshwater Collaborative is a huge partnership for us to really exploit the opportunities that we have. Connected Systems Institute with Microsoft, with Rockwell Automation, many other companies, including research partnerships with Madison. Again, another powerful types of partnership. Chancellor Blank will also talk about our work with MWork and some of the things in the power sector. We're expanding dramatically our work online to have badgeable or online stackable certificates and badge types of work. That's what the Tech Ed Frontiers is about. And of course, you've all heard, much like what Madison has with American Family, we similarly are focusing a lot on Data Science Institute with both Marquette University and Northwestern Mutual. Next slide, please. But here's the kicker. This is the point I think that both Chancellor Blank and I are living with. Aside from the massive hemorrhaging, the devastation that industry and others are experiencing because of the pandemic, higher education has been shocked. But in Wisconsin, Tim, in your introductory comments, you talked about a stagnant budget. I'd like to clarify that just a little bit. There's three major things happening on the slide. I know there's a lot of data, but I'm just going to basically say, here's the simple version. First, there's that big broad band that cuts through the middle. That's regional public universities funding from the years 2006 through 2018. Over those years, you've seen a decline and then a gradual increase. And especially over the last 5 years, we've seen this gradual increase. That's both national data and then the surrounding Midwestern states. The line that dips and then sticks back up, kind of your distorted hockey stick, if you will, that is Illinois. Illinois, as you probably know, their higher ed funding cratered in 2014 through 2016 or 17. And boy, they're back on a tear. Now, here's the biggest and most important point. That red arrow, that's us. That's Wisconsin. What you see is not stagnation. You actually see a significant disinvestment in public education in this state. This is some of the most compelling data, Brookings analysis of IPIT's data. It doesn't get more objective and more accurate than this. So that's the problem we're up against. And when you ask me, and when we talk in the Q&A about what are we facing, we're facing that higher education in the state continues to be behind corrections, transportation, Medicaid, and K-12. And that's the fundamental issue that we've got to overcome if we want to continue to have those positive outcomes. Next slide, please. Bottom line, what we need, and I think you will find Governor Thompson in terms of community addresses and opportunities, as well as Chancellor Blank and myself, making as many appearances as we can to talk with you and other significant leaders about both the UW system request and our own ways that our campuses align. So, for example, Governor Thompson has outlined, and I have the link in the right-hand side, you can see the top 10 initiatives. We're not asking for anything more than what we've actually had taken away from us in the last year. So this is not an increase, it's just to hold our own. And that 3.5% in terms of catching back up would include the Freshwater Collaborative that I've mentioned, a significant increase for our student mental and behavioral health, which we know is dramatically impaired today. This has been growing for a long time, but especially because of the pandemic, it's huge. I know that Chancellor Blank will talk with justifiable pride about what she's been able to do through the Badger and Bucky Promise programs. We seek to expand and build upon that with the Wisconsin Tuition Promise. That's pivotally important in Milwaukee because of the large number of underserved students, historically underrepresented students. And then finally, I think you'll all appreciate the opportunity to modernize administrative and financial processes. How does that align with Milwaukee? Well, we're talking about, and Tim and many folks on this call I know have heard about the Moonshot for Equity. We're leading the nation as the region to completely eliminate the achievement gap by 2030. Wisconsin, you may know, has the most significant achievement gap, both at the high school and earlier levels. And this is something that we're setting out to completely eliminate for Milwaukee in this region. The Freshwater Collaborative I've talked about. GPR stands for General Program Revenue. For especially research and access mission, we're among the top research universities in the nation. We're the least funded. We're in that category in a number of different dimensions. And of course, like Madison, we want to replace our engineering building. That's a separate category in terms of the capital budget. So bottom line, reinvestment is critical. Your support is essential for helping us get over these significant challenges. Thanks, Tim. Back to you.
Good. And Chancellor Blank, I want to bring you in here and certainly allow you some time to talk about the great things that UW-Madison is doing. But while Mark was talking, we got some questions in. And so if you don't mind, I want to start out with a couple questions for you. And the first one we talk about this is, the question that I think most parents and everybody has is the rate of inflation for college has been, or the cost of college has been going up much faster than the rate of inflation. Can you talk about that from the perspective of the UW campus and some of the inputs that are causing that?
So the good news is our tuition has been frozen for 8 years. And with this next biennial budget, we've heard nothing short of we will have it frozen for another biennial budget. So Wisconsin is doing its part. I'd also like to point out, and I know that Becky would reinforce this, we, in terms of the value for what you get in terms of our tuition relative to so many other areas, in terms of public education, there's just not a higher ratio of quality to cost. It's just amazing. But there are other costs to attend college. And one of the big ones is how much time you spend in college. And I know that Becky will talk about how she's been able to shorten that, and that reduces debt. We've also been working with our campaign, our recent record-setting campaign, to increase scholarship support. So those are the types of things that we're working on. But the data are compelling. We have seen over an 11 times increase in the last 25 years in terms of how much tuition has gone up relative to housing and other things that have gone up 3 or 4 times. So we have found that to be the case because as the investment from state support has shrunk for campuses to maintain their operations, they had to raise tuition. But that stopped, and we're doing everything we can to streamline, to expedite our curriculum, to work on better advising, to provide more scholarship support. So our debt load has actually plateaued and started to decline.
Becky.
Thank you, Tim. And it's always great to share the platform here with Mark. And thanks to MMAC for inviting us to come and talk about our favorite topic. I want to end up where Mark did with the budget, but let me say just a few things about what we're doing at UW-Madison and some of the effects of this past year of the pandemic. So UW-Madison continues to be a very hot school nationally. We set another new record for freshman applications last week. They are up 17% over last year. We're going to have, I think, between 53 and 54,000 applications for our freshman class. That's a good position to be in. And it really bucks the trend enormously of many other upper Midwestern schools that are suffering from the demographic decline in this area. We are now among the top 10 public universities in the country in our graduation rates. And, one impact of graduating people and graduating them faster, as Mark noted, is that people graduate with less debt. Among our graduating seniors last spring, 57% of them graduated with zero debt. And all the things that you hear about debt crises among students are not true at UW-Madison. And I say you can be proud of your flagship university here in the state on that. One reason for that is we have really worked in the last 7 to 8 years to greatly expand our scholarship aid. And, some of that is the campaign that many of you have participated in. If you're an alumni, we've funded over 5,000 new scholarships out of that. But I'm particularly proud of a 3-year-old program called Bucky's Tuition Promise. If you can apply, if you can be admitted to UW-Madison, and if you're a low-income family in the state of Wisconsin, that is to say, your family's income is at the median or below, that's a little over $60,000, we will guarantee that when you're admitted to UW-Madison, we will provide the scholarship aid to cover all tuition and fees for essentially 4 years. If you're coming from a 2-year school, we'll do it for 2 years. About 20% of our freshmen are now covered by this program, and we're essentially providing free college to low-income students in the state. Now, there are other expenses associated with college than just tuition and fees, but that's the program that the system would love to roll out for other schools around the state as well. And, it's a wonderful program for making sure we're accessible to all students in the state. Of course, when the pandemic hit this last year, it's caused a few challenges on both of our campuses. We redefined all the ways in which we do business. I mean, if you'd asked me a year ago that I was going to spend this year setting up testing labs and isolation spaces and, reventilating all my buildings in different ways, I would not have believed you, but we have done it. A lot of people said it wouldn't work. This last semester, the fall semester, we had a spike in the first week of classes that we brought down. And from the end of the fall semester, from the end of September through now, our positivity rates on campus have been below anything in Dane County and far below those of the state. Most of the weeks they're around 1 to 2%. Now, this semester, we've greatly ramped up our testing. We're hitting what is considered right now the gold standard for universities, which is we're demanding that every one of our undergraduates test twice a week. And indeed, to get into any campus building, you've got to have an app and you've got to show a badge on your phone, a green badge that is linked to your testing that shows that you have tested in the last several days and can therefore come into class, come into campus buildings. Our employees are testing once a week. And, this is how we're going to make sure that this semester we're really on top of infections and controlling them and catching them almost as soon as they occur. None of that is cheap or easy, but it's been important for us to run a safe campus and a safe community for Madison. Now, in addition, of course, to education, we're also running a huge research institution. We bring in about $1.3 billion in research at UW-Madison every year. We're one of the 10 largest universities in the United States in our research expenditures. And a growing share of that research focuses on COVID. I think we have over $50 million in federal grants right now working on COVID-related projects. And some of those are Madison and Milwaukee collaborations. For instance, there's a project to test wastewater to give us early warning about emerging clusters of disease so we can respond quickly to halt the spread of the virus. And in a partnership with Milwaukee Public Health, funded by the Center for Disease Control, we're sequencing COVID viruses on college campuses in Wisconsin and in Michigan to help better understand what variants are emerging, how they're emerging, and how they're spreading within these two states. But as Mark noted, our biggest collaborative projects with UW-Milwaukee are not COVID-based. For example, our College of Engineering and the Wisconsin Energy Institute have a proposal led by MWork to the US Department of Energy to develop and deploy connected energy systems, which could be the way that we power Milwaukee in the future. Our partners include Milwaukee-based businesses such as A.O. Smith, Eaton Corporation, WE Energies, and others. And we have a long-term partnership with UW-Milwaukee with GE Healthcare. It's one of our largest and biggest and long-term partnerships, developing state-of-the-art medical imaging to improve how we diagnose and treat diseases like cancer. Those are among the 372 current research collaborations that go on right now between Madison, UW-Milwaukee, or other Milwaukee entities. We do have a new report coming out on Thursday that looks at UW-Madison's economic impact on the state. And I haven't seen the final version, but I've been told that it's going to have a bottom line that says the impact of UW-Madison on the state economically is $30 billion through ourselves and through our very closely related entities such as WARF or the foundation. and among other things, through these type of industry partnerships, both here in Milwaukee and all across the region. Now, the pandemic has spotlighted the importance of having a major research institution in the state. We've been involved with some of the trials that are being run about AstraZeneca. We've been doing a lot of work on this virus, a lot of work on its impacts. But look, the pandemic has had a big effect, and it's had a particularly big effect on our finances. My CFO and I every so often just sit around and look at each other and say, have you ever seen anything like this year? Our short-term losses, if you compare where we're going to be by the end of this fiscal year, which is June of 2021, with where we thought we would be a year ago before the pandemic hit, we're going to be down $320 million in either lost revenues or expenditures on health-related things that we weren't planning on. Now, that is a huge hit. The good news, that's a short-term cash flow problem, because if we get back to normal by next fall, and I'm very much hoping we will with our vaccination efforts, all of that revenue will pop back for next year. But it means we have a huge revenue gap that we have to fill for this year. Now, some of those losses are focused in a few places. Athletics has lost almost 50 million. That's not surprising given what hasn't happened in athletics. Our housing and dorms are down by about 50 million. And the state took 50 million back from UW-Madison alone, quite a bit more from the whole system, either requiring us to return budget money or not sending us money that they had promised in the last budget. So the question is, how do you deal with this short-term cash flow problem? And the good news is we went into this year in a really good financial position. So rather than putting that money into some of the investments we were planning on, that's the loss, we instead have put it into covering some of this. We've also received some federal funds that cover some of these pandemic-related expenses, and the newest stimulus plan will give us more. And we've taken a lot of actions to reduce expenses. Obviously, no one's traveling. We're not hiring people. We've frozen salaries. We've pulled back all of the budget distributions we're going to make for next year. And we have imposed mandatory furloughs on all of our staff so that every employee at UW-Madison is having a year of reduced income of somewhere between 2.5 to 4.6%, depending on the number of furlough days that they have to take over this current year. Those of us in leadership have taken a voluntary 15% cut in our pay. And on top of that, we've implemented budget cuts of around 5% in all of our units. Now, that's going to get us through this. But of course, it's a budget year. And here's what will really be a problem. If we then get another budget cut in this state budget, on top of the problems we're dealing with in the pandemic. And, Mark could tell similar stories to those that I've told. So, we've got a couple of asks of the state, and Mark has talked about some of those. The first is, don't cut us this year. And in fact, we'd really like some additional budget money. And there's a set of programs out there that we would fund with that money. It would be very hard for us, for Milwaukee, for any of the schools in the system to deal with an additional budget cut on top of the pandemic crises that we're facing. Secondly, borrowing authority. What do you do in a short-term cash flow problem? It's going to be resolved and your revenues are going to come back. You borrow and spread the bad year against future good years. Well, what's the problem? The University of Wisconsin, the system, the flagship, UW-Milwaukee, none of us have borrowing capacity. Every other university in the country, every other 49 states have borrowing abilities to their state university. The technical colleges within the state of Wisconsin have borrowing ability. And it is creating enormous problems for me relative to my peers that I can't smooth this cash short flow. It makes just no sense at all. And our athletic department is example number one. You don't want me to fire all of our coaches and pull everything down, only to have to rebuild the department come next September when we're back again. And every other university is borrowing to support its athletic department. I'm not able to do that. I'm dealing with it by, basically chicken wire and masking tape, trying to put something together that is going to give them some internal loans and hold them together until their revenues return. So borrowing authority. Third, and this third one is another financial tool that virtually all of our peer schools have. Flexibility to handle our working capital. We're constantly running cash balances. We have to save money for buildings we're building. If we want to implement new IT systems, our tuition comes in lumpy ways. Well, right now we basically deal with our cash balances with our working capital by for all intents and purposes, putting it under the mattress. We have no ability to invest it. And we'd really like the ability to invest some share of that in intermediate term instruments like every one of our peer universities does. And for UW-Madison, that's worth $10 to $20 million a year. That's a huge amount of money by basically doing what everyone else is doing and what we should be doing to manage our resources well. Finally, lastly, we're looking at a couple of major capital projects like Mark. We've got a new engineering building we need, and we need a new classroom office building for our expanding undergraduate population. And we're going to be arguing for that with the state and for a strong capital budget. This year, more than any other year, has highlighted the value of having some big research universities for their education, for their research, for the things that they add to the state and the ways in which they can help the state through the crisis that it is in as well through this pandemic. We are fortunate in Wisconsin to have two top research universities that deliver all of this. And I hope many of you will consider advocating on our behalf as we move into this budget year. So thank you, and let me stop there, and happy to answer questions.
Sure, and let me ask you both a question. We've got a couple minutes left, and so, first a tactical question for both of you. When do you expect students to come back onto campus?
Well, we have students right now back on campus in different ways. We're at about 20 to 25% of our full-time capacity. The rest are in hybrid or online mode. And then we'll be doing even more in the summer. And Tim, as Becky said, this fall, we expect to resume normal operations. That's the plan. We can always pivot back, but the plan is we're all in. And we really think this fall, especially as Dr. Raymond portrayed, and while nobody's saying June, July is an important point, for us, that's what we're anticipating in terms of readily available vaccines. Our campuses are on that front line in terms of being suited up for vaccination sites. So certainly in the fall to as full a degree as possible.
And I want to say something that people often don't understand. While we have a mix of both online and in-person classes, and more online classes than not right now, virtually all of our students are in Madison. They all went home last May, and they stayed home and finished their classes last spring at home, spent many of them the summer at home. And by the time the summer was over, whether they were going to take classes in person or not, they weren't staying at their parents' house any longer, and their parents didn't want them. So they all came to Madison. We estimate that about 90 to 95% of our students are in Madison, even if some of them are doing all virtual work. So that's one of the reasons why our outreach around health protocols is so important for the whole community.
And then, Becky, I'm going to start with you and then go to Mark. So the governor introduces his budget mid-February. And as you both have mentioned, this has been a critical year for both UWM, both UWMs here. And so if you had, and Becky, you started with this, if you had two or three things that you want to make sure happen in this budget and you want our audience to know, what would those be? And I'm going to ask Mark the same thing.
For the four things that I just mentioned, I want if at all possible, an increase in our budget and absolutely not a cut, right? And the state budget's actually looking like it can accommodate that, right? There's not the disaster everyone was worried about. Number two, I want some borrowing authority. It is time to give your universities major. Number three, going along with that, the ability to handle our working capital like any other major institution of $3+ billion. And number four, a strong capital budget.
Mark?
Tim, I'll be just a little different. I'd certainly reinforce and agree with Becky, but I'd put more specifics to me. If we had to single some things out, number one, that tuition promise, that is absolutely critical given our student needs and the goals that I have for supporting our students to the greatest possible degree given our funding situation. So within the budget request, that tuition promise is huge. That's roughly $40 million that will really make a big difference here in Milwaukee. Number two, the capital projects. If we don't get that new engineering building, we're going to be really held back. And those are the major areas that we have from industry partnerships where they need really to see the types of things that we can do around computer science, software engineering, the applied manufacturing, smart work that we're doing. That is a big deal for us. So those are the two primary goals for UW-Milwaukee.
And I noticed that neither of you talked about the ability to control your own tuition. Does that just fall down the list of the other asks, or where does that stand?
So President Thompson addressed that at an event that both Mark and I were at about 2 weeks ago, and he just said politically didn't think we were going to get that in this budget. I mean, all of you are in business, right? You tell me what you would have done if the state had basically frozen your prices 8 years ago and kept them frozen and going to freeze them another 2 years. This is just crazy. It's not the way to run a business. We need to be affordable, but being affordable doesn't mean freezing tuition. It means providing things like the scholarships and the access to low-income students that both Mark and I are working very hard to do.
Great. Well, I want to thank you both very much for your time and for laying out the case. And I think it's something we need to follow up as the budget gets introduced and keep pace with the ask that you're making. And so really appreciate you sharing the background, the information, and what you're looking for. And again, your leadership of two really critical institutions to Milwaukee and Wisconsin.
Thanks for this opportunity, Tim.
Thank you.